No one expected movement from that slope. The exfil roster was locked, the flight crews were accounted for, and the terrain declared inaccessible had been written off by command as a loss. Inside the hangar, the recovery logs were already being drafted. No recovery achieved. No survivors confirmed. But, as the rescue Blackhawk made its final pass, a silent signal appeared through the mist. Not a flare, not a call for help. Just one figure, emerging from the ridgeline, carrying another across her shoulders. And then everything changed. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story intrigues you, please consider subscribing to hear more untold stories of extraordinary service and the heroes who walk among us, never asking for the recognition they deserve. The fog drifted down from the ridgeline in long, quiet curls, softening the edges of the flight line and muffling the voices rising from the hangar. The tarmac, still dark with dew, glistened beneath the halogen floodlights mounted high on the steel frames. Two Black Hawks were parked near the edge of the pad, side by side, rotors still and angled slightly from overnight wind. Ground crews moved between them with practiced ease, tightening buckles, scanning inventory crates, checking fuel indicators without breaking conversation. The rhythm was exact, confident, familiar. Jessie crossed the concrete without a sound. Her boots made no echo. The cuffs of her flight pants were already dusted from walking the outer edge of the operations lot. She wore her crew vest zipped high, her flight gloves looped tight through a carabiner on her belt. They swayed faintly as she walked. The fingers darkened with oil, worn in the palms. No one looked up when she passed the fuel rig. One crewman nudged another with his elbow. Not toward her, but toward the last pre-brief sheet tacked near the command tent. No one mentioned her name. The interior of the tent buzzed with radios and the distant chop of another bird spinning up beyond the hill crest. Inside, laminated maps were pinned to a corkboard that had gone soft with years of staples, weather overlays, terrain elevation, wind estimates, and time blocks, all layered in overlapping strips of yellow and red. Jessie stepped to the edge of the table without hesitation, but her hand paused before reaching for the briefing clipboard. Her name wasn't on it. Not under flight crew, not under secondary lift. Instead, beside her designation, someone had penciled in 3 words, manifest time log. She stood still for a full beat, then reached into the side pocket of her leg rig and touched the folded map she had drawn the night before. It was a full topographic grid of the exfil zone, inked by headlamp at 2 a.m. when the base had finally gone quiet. It was folded twice and sealed in plastic. No one had asked her for it. No one knew it existed. Major Collier brushed past her carrying the launch manifest, his voice raised just enough for everyone in the tent to hear. He called out the names of primary crew Walker, Day, Alvarez. Jessie's wasn't spoken. When he paused near the edge of the tent, he looked at her, but only for a second. "You're riding logistics support," he said, eyes back on the board. "Just mark wheels up times. Do not interfere with the lift order." He was already turning before she could reply. Not that she intended to. She gave a small nod and stepped aside as the others filtered in, laughing over missed coffee and weather adjustments. She caught one voice, low and careless, as 2 crewmen moved toward the supply crate. "She's still not lift certified, right?" The other gave a shrug. "She's solid on maintenance, but I wouldn't want her on haul. No offense. She's like 150. Maybe." They chuckled, not unkindly, just offhandedly, like they were discussing weight limits, not people. Jessie walked back toward the southern pad where the last cable check was finishing. The ground was slick from last night's frost thaw. She stopped beside a winch rig with a lopsided buckle and adjusted the lower strap without being asked. The flight tech on duty didn't thank her, just glanced once to be sure it was secure, and moved on. The rest of the team loaded the sling with the quiet efficiency of long repetition. A younger specialist snapped his harness too fast and had to redo it. Jessie noticed. She said nothing. Beyond the ridge, the sky had started to lift from black to dark blue. Another bird lifted off in the distance, the rotors spooling up in deep, resonant pulses. Jessie stood by the corner of the concrete apron, hands behind her back, watching the crew of Blackhawk 3 load in. She could see Day's silhouette in the side door, gesturing something toward the tech on the ground. Walker stood near the ramp, talking to one of the squad leaders through the headpiece. Jessie wasn't close enough to hear, but she could read the posture. They weren't waiting for her. She glanced once more at the hand-drawn map in her pocket, then at the checklist clipped to the storage rig. Her gloves remained at her side, the fingers curled from use, still dark from the last engine cycle she cleaned by hand. She didn't reach for them. She didn't reach for anything. Still hanging back? Someone said near the generator, not directed at her, just floating through the early air. Jessie didn't respond. The Blackhawk's rotors kicked up a swirl of dust that curled along the tarmac like smoke, lifting stray bits of grit and plastic from the corners of the pad. The crew climbed in, each movement automatic. No one waved. The bird lifted in a low arc, rotors thundering the frost off the trees. Its light swept briefly across Jessie's vest, then disappeared into the fog rising over the southern hill. She watched it rise until the sound thinned out. Then she turned and walked back toward the crate stack, her boots making no sound, her gloves still swaying quietly at her hip. The first call came in over the emergency band at 11:43, clipped and uneven, masked by wind noise and rotor backwash. A Blackhawk on descent had lost pitch alignment while flaring over a narrow slope. The terrain wasn't supposed to be that steep, but erosion or outdated grid data had misled the nav overlay. The tail rotor clipped something rock, tree. No one knew, and the aircraft went hard into the brush. No explosion, but the airframe crumpled. Crew signaled from steep elevation, one pilot unresponsive, no flat zone, no extract. Inside the command tent, the air shifted from normal chatter to pressure. Controllers stepped back from terminals and leaned into headsets. Someone cursed under their breath. On the screen, a red beacon marker blinked but didn't stabilize. A terrain overlay loaded in broken frames. The sight was worse than expected angled slope, partial landslide debris, gusts curling down the western side of the ridge. A voice near the console called for an alternate evac angle. The reply came in flat. There wasn't one. Jessie heard none of the voices directly, but the logistics channel ran open on her shoulder receiver, just below her collar. The link was scratchy, a second-tier network meant for supply routing and maintenance status, but it picked up the key fragments. Blackhawk down, pilot unconscious, wind shift approaching, attempted hover abort. She stood near the supply rig at the back of the compound, a clipboard under her arm, still pretending to do what they'd assigned her. A thin trail of dust spun across the tarmac as a returning fuel truck backed into position. From where she stood, the tents looked stable. Nothing appeared wrong. But the voice on the line repeated the phrase again. Slope too steep. No secure zone. Command preparing fallback. The second bird went up just after noon. She saw it lift. Its pattern was tight, cautious. She followed the sound until it faded behind the trees. Then came the call. No one wanted to say out loud. Pull back. No safe hover. They would wait for a ground sweep. Reinforcements by foot. 6 hours minimum. The decision came from the operations hub. Mission aborted. Hold position. No alternate flight plan viable. No one noticed Jessie set the clipboard down. She stepped behind the row of crates where her satchel hung from a corner hook. Inside it was the hand-drawn map. She unfolded it carefully, hand steady, and pulled a marker from her vest pocket. On the edge of grid 4, near the terrain drop she had penciled as unstable, she wrote the date and time. Next to it, 3 letters to note the downed aircraft. She packed with precision. 1 canteen, backup gloves, sling harness, wind cap. She checked the weight against her belt frame, adjusted for balance, and clipped the medkit to her right side. The gear made no sound as she moved. Her breath stayed slow. The fog over the ridgeline had thickened into a smear of white-gray motion, trailing fingers down the slope where the failed extraction had turned. Inside the command tent, the crew had already pivoted. Screens blinked into standby. Flight leads began drafting the formal note for the daily log exfil delayed due to weather and terrain compromise. One of the aides reviewed the fallback path. Another checked fuel storage ahead of the next rotation. No one said his name. The pilot. Jessie finished adjusting the final strap and lifted the sling over her shoulder. She tapped her map once to fold it along the marked coordinates and tucked it behind the front panel of her vest. The wind picked up again, higher now, cresting from the far slope. It carried the sound of rotor wash from a distance, then silence again. She walked across the far apron without pause, crossing the boundary line where the vehicles gave way to supply storage and beyond that to the slope. No call sign announced her departure. No one at the checkpoint asked her to log out. Her boots pressed clean tracks through the gravel just beyond the generator outflow. A small terrain marker leaned at the edge of the berm, noting a drop in elevation over 70 vertical meters. She reached it and kept going, disappearing past the line where the path narrowed and dipped beneath the lower brush. While the fallback protocol settled into motion behind her, briefings reset. Teams reallocated, sweep crews delayed by red tape and signal loss. Jessie was already 100 yards from the edge of the compound. Her map was folded tight to the corner grid. Her steps were deliberate. No one had seen her go, and no one knew she was already climbing. The slope narrowed as Jessie reached the tree line. The canopy above had been scorched in places. Branches snapped in unnatural angles. The ground beneath her boots was layered with crushed underbrush, skid marks, and the unmistakable weight of forced metal. The air smelled of carbon and rotor oil. Fog clung low, curling around the wreckage. A single rotor blade rested against the rocks like a broken arm. The Blackhawk's tail was wedged into a ravine, its main body tilted sideways, half buried in brush. She stepped over a cracked branch and paused beside a gouge in the dirt where the frame had dragged. One figure moved just ahead, crouched, holding his ribs. He saw her but didn't speak. His vest was streaked with dirt, and his arm was bloodied. He lifted his other hand slightly in recognition, then slumped back to brace himself against the slope. He wasn't going anywhere. The pilot lay 10 meters beyond the tail, crumpled in a shallow depression. His helmet was off, rolled downslope and cracked at the rim. His body was still. Jessie crossed the distance without a sound, knees bent, boots soft in the damp soil. She knelt beside him and placed 2 fingers against his neck. Pulse, shallow, skin cool under the dirt and sweat. His breathing was thin but present. She reached into her rig and unfastened the sling. There was no radio noise, no sign of air traffic, no signal flare. The second bird had pulled off half an hour earlier, and ground crews weren't due for hours. The only sound was the wind tugging at the edge of the broken fuselage and the rustle of leaves where the fog moved downhill. Jessie adjusted the pilot's arm to prevent nerve compression. She shifted his weight slowly, supporting the neck with one gloved hand, tightening the harness straps with the other. Her movements were steady, practiced, no hesitation. Mud streaked the webbing. Her sleeve caught on a thorn, but she ignored it. She looked uphill. The ridge above was steep, loose rock giving way to brush. It wasn't a path. It wasn't anything. Just elevation. She studied it for a moment without blinking, then looked back down. The pilot's leg was bent at the knee, but not broken. His left boot was missing. She pulled the harness tight across his chest and clipped both sides of the carry sling to her chest strap. Jessie cinched her belt, braced her stance, and drew in a breath through her nose. One word left her lips, quiet and final. His name, just that. She crouched, shifted her weight low, and lifted him across her back in a slow, careful motion. The sling held. His body sagged slightly, but the load balanced. She leaned forward to center the weight. The burn started immediately through her thighs and shoulders. She took one step, then another. Each footfall tested the slope. The rock shifted under her heel but held. Behind her, the fog thickened again and swept the crash site from view. The man on the slope did not call out. The bird did not return. Jessie climbed, alone. The first 40 meters rose in crooked seams of rock and brush. Jessie moved without sound. The pilot strapped to her back, his body swaying slightly with each step. She adjusted the tension of the sling every few minutes, not from fatigue, but from balance. His weight pulled right. She countered left. Her boots bit into the slope, and when they slipped, she stopped completely, reset her footing, and began again. The terrain gave no rhythm. Loose shale scattered beneath her soles. Roots clawed sideways across the incline. At one point, she stepped onto what looked like solid dirt, only to drop 6 inches through a veil of moss. She caught herself with one hand braced against a boulder. Her knees bent under the full strain of the pilot's weight. Her breath rasped once through her throat. She didn't speak. The wind shifted around the 20-minute mark. A dry gust spun down from the western edge of the ridge, bringing grit into her face. She turned her head slightly to shield her eyes and kept moving. Above her, the slope steepened again, this time into a shelf of rock that would require hands. She looked up once, calculated her approach, and lowered to her knees. The sling creaked. Her shoulder straps slid. She stopped, leaned her right side into the dirt, and re-looped the webbing around her back. The motion was familiar modified load transfer, just like she had practiced on the dummy rig during isolation drills. Her gloves, already worn at the seam, gave a slight tear. She pulled off the right one, wrapped her palm in medical tape, and shoved her hand into the dirt. Her fingers disappeared to the knuckle. She pulled herself upward. Halfway up the ledge, the rock gave out. A handhold split in her grip. She dropped back down one foot, sliding in a controlled fall. The pilot's weight shifted again. Her left knee slammed into stone, but her footing held. She recentered, placed her right foot into a new groove, and climbed without pause. Her silence was total. Her breath, now rhythmic and loud in her own ears, kept cadence with her motion. One step, one hold, one pause, repeat. By the time she reached the midpoint, clouds had dropped across the ridge. Visibility cut in half. The air thinned. The wind no longer gusted. It hovered low, steady, pressing. She kept her posture angled forward, knees bent, neck neutral. The pilot's body remained limp against her spine, arms tucked close by the harness, face buried against the side of her neck. She checked his breathing once with a hand to his chest, still present, still shallow. The next section of the climb narrowed to a trail no wider than her boots. She paused before crossing. Her memory surfaced, training on slope angles and load-bearing techniques. A phrase from her instructor long ago: never carry weight that controls your momentum. Control it first, then move. She stepped. The path curved beneath her feet like a seam opening in fabric. She let the outside edge take her weight, adjusted the tension of her inner thigh, and pressed forward. A broken branch brushed her ankle. She stepped over it and kept going. Behind her, nothing moved. No voices. No rotors. No one calling her name. Near the crest of the ridge, the incline sharpened again. Her muscles screamed now. Her hands shook each time she stopped to re-grip a vine or push away a limb. She rationed her water by instinct, one sip every 100 steps. She didn't count out loud. She counted by breath. Somewhere behind the weather, a signal flickered to life on a distant console. In the command tent, a technician paused over a terrain overlay. A motion trace was moving up a slope with a heat profile. A field lead leaned in. "Is that one of the sweep teams?" "Negative," came the reply. "No clearance filed. No ID signature." "Then who is it?" No one answered. Back on the slope, Jessie crawled over a fallen log and paused to rest against it, knees in the dirt, elbows braced on her thighs. The sling had dug a raw groove into her left shoulder, now pressed dark and sticky through her undershirt. Her fingers were numb. She flexed them once, then twice. They responded. She adjusted the pilot again, redistributing the sling across the middle of her back. He was lighter now, not by weight, but by rhythm. Her body had adjusted. The climb was no easier, but it had become known. That made it survivable. With the ridge just 20 meters ahead, she took her last sip of water and left the bottle in a crook of brush. No reason to carry what she no longer needed. Her voice, still unused, remained low in her throat. Her ears rang from strain and silence. She pressed her hands into the dirt and moved forward. The final rise was jagged and dry. Her legs shook under the load. Her body tilted once, but she caught herself. A branch snapped behind her and rolled downhill. She never turned to watch it go. At the crest, light broke through a cloud gap. Pale, white, diffused. She stepped into it. From the outcropping half a click west, a crewman on aerial recon saw motion. He raised his binos, froze. "There's someone on the ridge," he said. The others leaned in. Wind noise cut their radios. One voice finally came through, hushed and stunned. "She's carrying him." Jessie didn't call out. She adjusted her grip, steadied the weight on her shoulders, and kept walking. The wind changed before she saw the aircraft. It wasn't a gust this time, but a full rotation shift. The air pressed down in pulses that rhythmically bent the brush. Jessie paused just below the final rock line, her body trembling from strain, the pilot still strapped across her back. She adjusted her footing with care, repositioned the sling slightly higher, and moved into the open without hesitation. Above her, the Blackhawk circled low and wide, the kind of pattern used when the crew had already written off recovery. Their comms were quiet, clipped. The co-pilot called another sweep west of the ridge. Nothing expected. No live signals confirmed. Still, they held pattern. Out of duty more than hope. Then someone in the cabin leaned forward, his hand pressed against the side window. A figure moved on the ridge, barely visible through the mist. Not sprinting, not waving, just walking, shoulders hunched, knees nearly buckling, burdened under something heavy. "Hold hover," the pilot said, eyes locked on the motion below. "There's someone down there, walking with weight." The crew chief scanned below with the hoist controller in one hand. He thumbed the internal channel. "I see her. Stand by for winch." Jessie stepped to the edge of the rock, her boots pressed into the ridge's uneven line. She didn't wave. She didn't yell. She simply moved into the clearest position, the wind snapping her sleeve and lifting the edges of her sling. The downwash from the rotors kicked dirt and debris around her legs, but she held steady. The cable dropped. She unhooked her chest strap and eased the pilot off her back with practiced precision, lowering him gently onto the rock ledge. Her arms shook with the release. She knelt beside him and looped the harness over his shoulders. Her fingers, shaking slightly, tightened the straps across his chest. One snapped too loose, she fixed it. The winch hook clanged softly against the buckle. "Crew on the ground. Confirm ID," the voice crackled in her earpiece. Jessie didn't answer. She locked the carabiner to the harness ring and raised her hand. The lift began. The pilot rose into the air slowly, his body limp in the harness, head lolling slightly. Jessie took 2 steps back as the sling cleared the rock shelf. Her legs gave once, just for a moment. She caught herself on a knee and held still. The downwash strengthened as the bird repositioned. Someone in the cabin shouted over the rotor noise. She brought him up alone. The answer came in a hush. "Has to be. No one else is on this ridge." The cable dropped again. This time slower. The winch operator's voice was quieter now. "Hook's yours." Jessie looked up once, then stepped forward. She pulled the secondary sling from her belt, looped it to the front ring on her vest, and clipped the winch hook herself. Her gloves, nearly worn through, slipped for half a second before she secured it. The lift began again. She rose above the ridgeline in silence. Her body hung rigid, arms at her side, face streaked with sweat and ash. Below her, the slope disappeared into mist. No one had followed her. No one had cleared her to climb. In the cabin, the crew chief braced and leaned out. He caught her hand and pulled her in with help from the second tech. Her boots hit the floor with a dull thud. She stood upright for a second longer than anyone expected. The pilot was already being stabilized in the aft seat, oxygen mask clipped into place. One of the medics looked up briefly and nodded, breathing steady. Jessie didn't speak. She stepped to the side, removed the sling from her vest, and dropped it beside her boots. Her left knee gave slightly again. She sat down without being told. Across the cabin, one of the younger crewmen stared. Was she cleared for this? No one answered. The rescue Blackhawk banked west, away from the ridge. The sky above remained overcast, the horizon fading into ash-colored fog, the cabin filled with the quiet sounds of repacking and low comms chatter. No one raised their voice. No one celebrated. Jessie leaned back against the inner wall, her breathing controlled, though uneven. Her gloves lay across her lap now, torn and blood darkened at the palms. She didn't remove them. The crew didn't thank her. Not yet. But they didn't stop looking, either. In the quiet hum of the aircraft's interior, amid all the equipment and the smudged gear and the restraint straps and open packs, the only movement was the crew turning toward her. Slowly, one by one. The pilot's chest continued to rise and fall beside her. Jessie sat still. The Blackhawk carried them both away from the ridge. The operations hangar was quiet. Just the low static hum of screen monitors and the occasional clack of keys. An overhead bulb flickered once above the corner station where two junior staffers worked in silence. On the central display, the mission log read incomplete. The official debrief note had already been drafted. No recovery achieved. Blackhawk 3 down. Lead pilot presumed critical. No confirmation of site egress. Major Collier stood near the whiteboard with a marker cap between his teeth, reviewing the fallback protocol with a second officer. A logistics tech organized unused sling kits on the bench behind them. One of the straps was slightly bloodstained, set aside without comment. The room felt finished. The story had already been written. Then the door opened. Boots slapped against the concrete in slow, unhurried rhythm. The kind of sound you heard before you understood what it meant. The kind of sound that cut through the hum. Jessie walked in without a word. Her vest was torn at the shoulder, webbing slack. Her left glove hung from 2 fingers, the seam fully split. There was dirt across her neck, dried blood at her elbow, and streaks of gravel embedded along the edge of her pants. She was soaked through the back, shirt clinging to the sling bruises just beginning to surface. She carried no pack, no visible weapon, just herself. The room stopped. Someone turned. Another paused mid-sentence. Collier looked up from the log. His voice caught halfway between authority and confusion. Where was she? The logistics tech stared, then stepped forward to the bench. His eyes locked on the missing sling kit. One strap gone. The blood-stained harness was hers. He didn't say anything at first, just looked from the kit to Jessie, then back to the manifest board. She wasn't listed. He finally said she wasn't on any manifest. They all turned now, slowly, as if trying to understand something too far outside protocol to process. The medbay doors burst open behind them. A gurney rolled through with 2 medics at the side. The lead pilot, oxygen mask secured, vitals faint but steady. One of the attending officers leaned in over the rails, confusion plain on his face. Who stabilized him? No one answered. A screen across the room blinked once, then loaded a feed, overhead drone footage, thermal tracking, a heat signature moving up a slope, slow and steady. Another body, limp, riding the back of the first. The angle was grainy but unmistakable. Her frame, her posture, a sling dragging behind one shoulder. The pilot dead weight across her spine. Someone turned the volume up, just enough to hear the breathing. The officer closest to the screen stared. Who carried him? A whisper followed. She did. A pause. All the way. The room fell still. No one moved toward Jessie. No one congratulated her. One of the flight commanders, still seated, removed his headset slowly and let it rest on the table. In the corner, the junior analyst rewound the footage again. This time slower. The image flickered, then sharpened on a frame, Jesse leaning forward, arms looped beneath the pilot's knees, both of them silhouetted against the last ridgeline before extraction. Major Collier stepped back from the whiteboard and looked toward the manifest still pinned to the side panel. Her name was missing, a single blank line where the support column ended. He didn't say her name. Someone finally asked it out loud, not loudly, just enough to float across the floor. Who authorized her? There was no reply. Then another voice, not a challenge, just the truth. She didn't wait to be. Jessie turned slightly. Her boots left faint smudges on the floor as she walked toward the side station. Her hands, still steady, reached for the glove at her hip. She stripped it from her fingers and dropped it into the open disposal bin beneath the first aid locker. They landed without sound. One of the junior staffers watched her cross toward the exit. She didn't look back. The footage looped again. The tracking dot on the ridge. The woman climbing. The dead weight on her back. The impossible path she'd crossed. No one said the word hero. No one gave a speech. There was no memo drafted. Jessie paused at the threshold of the room, adjusted her collar with one hand. Behind her, the screen kept playing. No one had looked before. Now, no one looked away. Sometimes, the ones not called are the ones already moving. Jessie was never cleared for the mission. Her name never appeared on the board. Yet when the ridge collapsed and protocol failed, she went anyway. Not for recognition, not for approval, but because someone needed to be carried, and no one else was coming. What you've just seen is not a story about strength in the loudest form. It's about the strength to act while unseen, the kind that walks into silence, carries the weight, and never asks who is watching. In a world that often rewards visibility, Jessie's story reminds us that some of the greatest acts of courage happen beyond the frame. Quiet, steady, unquestioned. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect, share your thoughts in the comments, or follow for more untold accounts of quiet strength and extraordinary service. You never know who might be listening.